What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 college football schedule preview and very early projected record series. The Oregon Ducks are up next. Before we look ahead to 2025, let's take a look back at what Oregon did in 2024. Here are my projections and predictions last year for the Oregon Ducks. My projection for this team was 11-1, and then my prediction for them was also 11-1. And Oregon did go undefeated in the regular season. They went 12-0. They were actually the only Power 4 team last year to really go undefeated in all of college football. So they went 12-0, so they did a lot better, a little bit better, just one game off a little bit from my projection and prediction to be accurate and everything. But this team went 13-1 overall last year. That was their overall record. If you count the Big Ten championship, that's where their 13th win came from. And then they had that one loss, of course, in the rematch against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. So they made it to the playoff last year as a number one seed, but they didn't really live up to a number one seed, prediction and everything. So, but yeah, it was a pretty good season for Oregon last year. Last year, it was their first year in the Big Ten as well. This was the schedule from last season here for the Ducks. And again, they were 12-0. They were the only undefeated Power 4 team to go undefeated in the regular season last year. You look at the schedule in the non-conference, they played Idaho, Boise State, and then on the road at Oregon State. So their non-conference schedule looked like it wasn't too tough, but it actually ended up being tougher than expected. Idaho and Boise State were two games that they kind of struggled a little bit early on. They beat Boise State only by 3 and only beat Idaho by 10. So those were two kind of struggling games. We were kind of still figuring out what Oregon looked like. And then after that Oregon State game, they won that one pretty big. They just went on a winning streak from there, and they ended up just going undefeated. You look at the games that they played at home in the Big Ten. They played Michigan State, Ohio State, Illinois, Maryland, and Washington. So they played 5 home games last year in the Big Ten. Of course, Ohio State was definitely the big one. They ended up winning the regular season matchup, but lost, of course, in the second matchup in the Rose Bowl. Then the road schedule last year, UCLA, Purdue, Michigan, and at Wisconsin. The road schedule wasn't really too tough last year for Oregon. I would say the two toughest road games were definitely Michigan and Wisconsin. They ended up beating Michigan pretty easily, but actually beat Wisconsin, only not really by a big margin. And Wisconsin wasn't really that great last year, let's be honest. But again, Oregon won every single game last year on their schedule. Let's now look ahead to 2025. This is the schedule for Oregon heading into 2025. Before we go game by game, let's take a look at who Oregon will play in the non-conference, and then we'll also take a look at their Big Ten home and away schedules for the upcoming conference games. They're going to be playing Montana State, Oklahoma State, and Oregon State in the non-conference this year. They get all their non-conference games at home. They don't have to play on the road in one of those non-conference games this year. Montana State, an FCS team, this is not a bad Montana State team. They were actually undefeated last year before losing the FCS championship to North Dakota State. So I don't think that will be an easy game. We saw what Oregon kind of looked like against Idaho last year, even though Idaho is not really that good, to be honest. But Montana State will be a little bit tougher than Idaho from last year. Oklahoma State, that's a Power 4 team. When you always have a Power 4 team on their schedule in the non-conference, that's always kind of a little bit tricky. But the Cowboys actually were not really that great last year, let's be honest. And then Oregon State, that's a rivalry game, of course. Anything can happen in this one. Last year's game was not really close. Oregon was definitely the better team, so maybe that's not a really tough game there for the Ducks, but that's your non-conference schedule. Let's now get to the home Big Ten schedule. So they're going to be playing 4 home games in the conference. They'll play Indiana, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and USC. All these 4 games will be at home for them. Indiana obviously will be very tough. Indiana obviously was one of the most surprise teams and the most underrated team from last year in the Big Ten. Oregon and Indiana did not play each other last year in the regular season, but this time they will, and Oregon does get this game at home, so that's the good news there. I think if you're an Oregon fan, you don't have to play on the road at Indiana, which really could, be tougher. But Wisconsin, Minnesota, and USC, Wisconsin was not very good last year. Minnesota and USC were just two pretty average teams, so Not a bad home schedule. These are all pretty winnable games for Oregon. I think the Indiana game might be a little bit tougher than all the three rest of the games on this home conference schedule. The away schedule, they're going to be playing 5 road games this year. They'll play Northwestern, Penn State, Rutgers, Iowa, and Washington all on the road this year. Northwestern, Rutgers, those 2 games, are pretty winnable games on the road. Penn State, Iowa, and Washington, these are 3 tough places to play. Penn State definitely would be the toughest road game on here. That's a rematch, of course, from the Big Ten championship game. And then, of course, Iowa and Washington are 2 really big trap games. I think Iowa is always a very tough place to play. And then, of course, Washington, that's a rivalry game. Anything can happen in that one as well. So let's now go back to the schedule here and go game by game now for the Ducks. They'll start things off, of course, with Montana State here on August 30th. Then it's Oklahoma State here at home on September the 6th. Then they'll open up Big Ten play here on the road at Northwestern on September the 13th. Then they'll play their other non-conference game against Oregon State at home on September the 20th. Then it's on the road. There's the big one at Penn State here on September 27th. Again, that's going to be a big-time game, especially here in the month of September. Teams are not really that better by that time. So we'll see what Oregon looks like after 4 weeks have been played. But also, that's going to be a very tough game in my opinion. Their first bye week actually comes at a pretty good time, though. It comes like the bye week comes before playing Indiana at home on October the 11th. I like how the bye week's set up for Oregon on this schedule, to be honest, because it's right before a game against Indiana, especially after a really physical battle with Penn State. Let's say they lose that game. You're coming off that physical game. You need that time to recover before playing Indiana, especially at your home place. So they'll play Indiana there on October the 11th. Then it's on the road at Rutgers on October 18th. Then at home against Wisconsin on October 25th. Then in the month of November, their second bye week comes at a pretty good time as well. They'll play on the road at Iowa here on November 8th. Then it's at home against Minnesota on November 15th. USC at home on November 22nd. And then they close things out with the rivalry game on the road at Washington on November 29th. So schedule a lot tougher last year, a lot tougher this year compared to last year, I should say, for Oregon. They got some pretty tough road games on here with Penn State and Iowa and Washington. Those are definitely 3, tough road games. Penn State definitely would be their toughest one. I think, Rutgers, Iowa, and Washington, those 3 could be probably trap games. And then you got pretty much easy home games except for that Indiana game. That Indiana game is going to be definitely very tough. So that's your schedule. Let's now get into the projection here for Oregon. This is the scale I'll be using here for this projection for the Ducks. If it's a 1% game in the red, remember, that's counted as an automatic loss. Those are games where I think Oregon definitely will have no chance in, but you're not going to be seeing any red, orange, or yellow games here in those percentages on the schedule because Oregon is going to be favored in almost every single one of their games. The orange games, though, in the 20% range, those are games where Oregon will be double-digit underdogs, 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that range. 40% games in the yellow are going to be games where Oregon will be a 6, 7, 8-point underdog by about a touchdown. Let's say that 50-50 games will stay in the white, games that can go either way. Then 60% games in the purple are going to be games where Oregon will be favored by about a touchdown, 6, 7, 8 points, somewhere in that range. And then the 80% games in the blue, those are games where Oregon will be favored by double digits, 10 to 14 points. And then 99% games in the green, those are your automatic wins, not guaranteed wins. And I'd say this for the red games as well. They're not guaranteed losses, but these are counted as automatic wins and then also counted as automatic losses here for these projections. So we'll start with the automatic wins here for Oregon. Really, that's just one game on here. Montana State here at home on August the 30th. That's an FCS team. I get it. Montana State was pretty good last year, but I think Oregon will still be better, the better team. I don't think this game is over that 95% range, though. I think this definitely is a game that's just outside that 90% mark. That's a game Montana State definitely could come out really competitive. I mean, they could be just like 17-point favorites in this game. I don't really see Oregon being a 30-point favorite or a 20-plus point favorite, to be honest. I think Montana State can actually put up a pretty good fight. Let's be honest, Montana State, again, one of the top FCS teams from last year, but I do expect Oregon to still take care of business in this one. Again, it's not a guaranteed win, but it's counted as an automatic win here in this projection for 2025. Let's now get to the blue games, the games where Oregon will be favored by double digits by a couple of touchdowns, 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that range. I got 6 of them on here: Oklahoma State, Northwestern, Oregon State, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and USC. I think all 6 of these games, the Ducks will be favored by double digits. Oklahoma State, that's a Power 4 team in the non-conference, but the Cowboys were not really good last year, and I think playing at home, Oregon definitely has a big advantage. If this game was on the road for Oregon, I definitely would put it in the purple, but I'm going to stick with it for now and put it in the blue. Northwestern on the road, I get it, it's on the road, but Northwestern was not really good last year, and plus Oregon is the better team. Oregon State, that's a rivalry game, but last year's game was obviously not close. The Ducks get them at home, and same thing for Wisconsin. They were not really good last year. The Ducks played them at home. Minnesota and USC, those are 2 teams that were pretty average last year. Maybe those are games that could be a little bit tricky for Oregon, but I think Oregon definitely should be favored by double digits in all 6 of these games. And they're also counted as wins. They're not automatic wins, but we count them as wins as well, just based off of the projection. So those are the 6 games where I think Oregon will be favored by double digits, also by a couple of touchdowns, 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that range. Then we go to the purple games. I got 3 of them on here where I think Oregon will be favored by about a touchdown: Rutgers, Iowa, and Washington. So I think all 3 of these games, Oregon will be favored by a touchdown, 6-7 points, somewhere in that range. And I know that Rutgers is a game that should be in the blue because Rutgers definitely not on the level against Oregon, but I think this is a trap game. Let's be honest. Rutgers is a team that probably can run the football. They can pound the offense at running the football, and that could be a game where the Ducks kind of struggled to, face the run of the Rutgers. But you never know about the Scarlet Knights. This was a pretty good team last year. Not a great team, but just overall a pretty decent team. Iowa was about average last year, but it's always a very tough place to play at Iowa. That's why it's in the purple here, and that's why it's a trap game here for the Ducks. And then obviously Washington, that's also a trap game. I get it's a rivalry game. It should be a 50-50 game, but Oregon definitely still the better team because Washington is still trying to kind of figure things out with Jedd Fisch. I think they can probably have a really good second season under him, but as of right now, I'm going to favor Oregon by a touchdown in all 3 of these games. And that does leave Penn State and Indiana. These are 2 50-50 games in my opinion. These are the 2 games that I think can really go either way. Penn State on the road, that's always a very tough place to play. And if that's a night game, that's probably going to be a whiteout there. And that might be a big, big game right there as we go into the season. Indiana, obviously, you get a bye week before playing this one. I do like how the bye week's set up for Oregon. You got a bye week after that Penn State game. Let's say they lose to Penn State. You're coming off that physical game, and you kind of need some time to rest. So you kind of recover before that Indiana game. That's really a good spot for a bye week, in my opinion. You don't have to play them back-to-back, which is really good news as well. But Indiana is still a 50-50 game, just based off of what they did last year. That's really definitely just a toss-up as of right now. So those are your 2 50-50 games. So what's the projected record come out to be for Oregon based on how tough this schedule is? Again, this is not my official prediction. This is simply a projection based on how tough the schedule is and how each team was really good from how bad each team was from last year and how good each team was from last year. We count that one green game as a win, and then same thing for the blue games. Then you average out the purple games at 60%. Then you split those 50-50 games at 50%. Let's say they win one of those 2 games there in the 50-50 range between Penn State and Indiana. That gives you a projection of 11-1. So that's what the projected record looks like here for the Ducks. This was the same projection I had for Oregon last year. I don't know if they can go undefeated, though, because if you look at Penn State, that's on the road. That's going to be a very tough place to play. But they can definitely lose one of these purple games, if I'm not mistaken. That Iowa game will be very, very tough because that's always a very tough place to play. Washington, obviously, you never know. That's a rivalry. You never know what can happen in that kind of game. But yeah, Indiana, that's also a game that you don't want to sleep on. Even though it's at home for Oregon, I just think it's pretty much an even matchup right now. I think the Ducks probably will be favored by a field goal as of right now, but I'm just going to go ahead and stick with it as a 50-50 game so far. So that is what the projection comes out to be for Oregon. It's 11-1 for 2025. 2025. Do you guys agree or disagree? Let me know down in the comments below, and what do you think about Oregon's schedule for 2025? Is it very tough, or is it really a lot easier compared to last year's schedule? Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.